Hey everybody, this is Fury Surech. I'm with Cory Bitar, and we're going to talk about Walden, Thoreau's great work of philosophy. Other people read it as a great example of nature writing, written in the early 1800s. I don't remember the exact date. Do you?
No, 1840s, I believe, though. We
Right.
could at least narrow it down to that.
Yeah. And it's the pond is still there. The facsimile of the cabin that he lived in is still there, famously full of
Yeah.
cracks. And the idea of going out into the woods and using that as an opportunity to be more perceptive and self-aware. How would you describe Walden if you had to describe it in you know, a couple words?
Oh, in a couple words, yeah, I mean, the Walden experiment is just, I think it's a youthful impulse, and it's romantic, it's idealist, it's profound. Um, I could probably stop there, but
Yeah, no,
all
I'm
those
just
things for sure.
and so many ways to get inspired by it. I remember um, I didn't even read the book, and I was inspired by the book. People, just the way people talked about it. Though, well, this young guy, I think he was what, 26, um,
Yeah.
went off into the woods and just thought, what's it like to live away from civilization and just observe nature and then learn from it. But then the more you know about it, the more you realize it's a kind of a commentary on so much on politics, on philosophy, on religion, on religions, because he has a lot of things in there from Hindu traditions. One thing among the transcendentalists, as they used to call those people, Thoreau, Emerson, and them, they're interested in Eastern philosophies. So yeah, personally inspiring, intellectually stimulating, right? Uh,
Yeah, yeah, very witty.
exactly, yeah. And great prose writer, great from the point of view of English literature if you like really original, strong writing. And what did the guy do as a job? I think he was a school teacher and he made pencils, right? Didn't he make pencils or something like that?
I heard something about that. I kind of forgot about his occupation altogether. Maybe in service to his desire, wanting to forget about it himself.
Right, 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 right. Yeah, so what are we going to do? What's our plan? I think we're going to take a look at this chapter two, which is called Where I Lived and What I Lived For. And we're going to go through some famous quotations from that chapter. And then we'll mostly I want to hear your ideas, Corey, because very, very stimulating, interesting to talk to you about Thoreau. Let's get a shot. I'm going to get a shot of Thoreau here, just sharing the screen just to see what he looked like. I guess I don't know at what age this is, but here he is, uh,
Hmm.
Henry David Thoreau, very intense guy. Um,
Very intense.
so let's get started with one of the first one of the first quotations. For a man is rich in proportion to the number of things which he can afford to let alone.
Mm, yeah.
What do you think, my friend?
Well, that one's just always stood out to me. It it basically just distills almost all of the human condition down to just wanting peace, wanting to get on with your life without the weight of responsibilities and the everyday duties of life uh, burdening you. And yeah, it's just I think he spends a lot of time thinking about things in a manner that everyone knows. So he kind of reveals something that you kind of already knew, but it just sits there in the back of your mind, and he really just brings things forward. And I think this is a great example of him kind of reminding us that our our drive to work, our drive to make money is really to just reduce our burden altogether. And he starts the reason for his experiment is that he finds our our work and having forgotten the primary motivation, one of the primary motivations of it, as paradoxical to the goal, and that uh, he felt that his neighbors were working so hard that they were creating more work to be had, and it was just a kind of a cyclical um, burden on everybody, and he wanted his neighbors to wake up from that.
Yeah. Um, One thing you just said was is stuck in my mind because when I think of something like a man is rich in proportion to the number of things he can let go, he's in the middle of talking about property. And
Mhm.
you pointed out that duties are also things that we want to let go of so that we can concentrate on, you know, friendship and, whatever our values are, meditation, friendship, being a good person to yourself and to others. Um, but you included among the things that you let go, duties as well, duties, responsibilities. Um, so, um, so let's take a look at what it looks like on the page because that's going to be fun to see what context it comes in. So
Mhm.
in one of his great metaphors, he says he's kind of looking around. If you go there today, it's still a very rural area. This is not a picture from the time. It's a picture from 1900. It's actually quite difficult to find a really good, solid first edition reprint of Walden. You find it with, sometimes it has an engraving, sometimes it has a little sketch, like the original book had sketches in it. I like this copy just because it's just laid out beautifully. And this is the way it looked around Walden in 1900. So that's a good 60 years after. And it kind of still more or less looks like this. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, so he's walking around, he's looking around, and he says, "An afternoon suffice to lay out the land into orchard, woodlot, and pasture." In other words, he's imagining laying out a farm, but it's not actually happening, right? He's just thinking, "This is where I would lay out a farm." And then he said, "You know what? And then I'll just kind of leave this one field fallow. In other words, I'll leave this field without doing anything." And then he says, a man is rich in proportion. So it always has that quality. It's got the metaphor is that um, he is he is like letting go of land, but the the wittiness is that he never had the land to begin. He never owned it to begin with. He only owned it in his imagination.
right. Yeah, yeah. It's a really fun, and I think he does it quite a bit, where he kind of ebbs and flows between metaphor and literal speak.
Mm.
Um, Perhaps that's kind of a lost art since the 19th century. It seems moderns tend to struggle with that, especially 21st century. But he was really skilled at it, and um, really, I think the thing that I really enjoy about Thoreau's writing is the the flow of it. You really get captured, and he's one of those authors where uh, as the words come in, the imagery just flashes through your eyes. It's like your your thoughts marry the words on the page because his flow is just this it's kind of just the same flow as we our inner monologues, and um I think that's what captures a lot of readers.
So do you think that what do you think causes that to happen? Why is it so easy to follow his images as they come up one by one?
I think even though the prose is beautiful, it's pretty easy to imagine that this these were almost just kind of raw um strings of thought. and put to page. I think that's what makes it really easy to follow is that he writes like he thinks. That's at least how I imagine it.
Mm. Yeah. I had a professor once in Scotland that said I used to follow him around trying to get his secret because you know I speak to audiences, I give lectures from time to time, and at that time I was like really admiring how he spoke. He spoke so well, so easily, so comfortably, and it was very easy to follow. And even though the topic was quite complicated. He often talked about early 20th century modernism, which is a very tough topic, Ezra Pound and people like that. And I said, how do you do that? He said, well, I try not to overplan so that when I'm speaking at this, I have to think about what I'm going to say next. So I'm speaking at the same speed at which I have to think through things. And that's slow enough for everyone else to capture what I'm saying too. Now, I don't know if he really did that. A lot of times people say,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, it's nothing. Meanwhile, there's hundreds of hours of study behind it. But it always struck me this idea of like the slowness of the explanation actually helps a little bit.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. I think anytime I've had to speak publicly, I've had to just completely go off the top of my mind because it it just seems choppy or speedy or winded. And when you just take the time to be deliberate and speak at the rate in which you think and kind of there's an authenticity to it as well. So it really what would you say? It disarms people a bit, or maybe primes them would be a better way to say it. Um, it it's the way we have normal discourse, and it's bad enough you're standing at the front of the room, authoritative, like if you can speak from the mind, it really, I think it tends to help the listeners.
Right. And so we've seen that he uses a set of metaphors, a set of images. They're delivered at a speed or at least in a clarity
Mhm.
that we can follow. And the metaphor here is that he is buying and selling properties in his mind. But in the middle of buying and selling properties in his mind, he kind of casually mentions that he has talked to someone about buying their property. So here it says, for example, the nearest I came, in other words, the closest I got to owning something, with all this stuff going on in my head, to actual possession was that I bought the Hollowell place and had begun to sort out my C's and collected materials. But before the owner gave me a deed of it, his wife, and a little bit Fred Flintstone's kind of old school patriarchy there, changed her mind and wished to keep it, offered me $10 to release him. Um, so he said, it's okay. You don't have to give me the $10. You don't have to sell me the property after all. So he goes, I had no damage to my poverty. God forbid I should get a little less poor. That would be terrible. So he actually did make a deal to buy a property in the middle of this very imaginary idea of like owning property just in his imagination. But I know that we talked about this before, and I know that you really like this little phrase here.
Yeah, yeah, without any damage to my property poverty. Yeah, it's just a real testament to his intellectual consistency, I suppose. Um, he was very suspicious of deed taking and mortgaging and all of these things. Um, I I kind of it kind of takes me back to a previous chapter every time I talk about this line where he talks about um, an I guess a traveler or perhaps someone um, incredibly poor, looking for home. And he said, "I have pitied him not because that was all that was his all, but because he had all that to carry." And I mean, he just had a few things on his back walking the street, and even to Thoreau, that was a burden because he could have just been walking down the street under only the strain of his own body, but to Thoreau, those possessions were weighing him down, and although they were few, they weren't few enough to him.
Right.
And I and just he really it's a pattern that just keeps coming up um that he recognizes the paradoxical nature of our materialism and the things that we prize, um and s- to some degree dupe ourselves into thinking they benefit us even in a time when they clearly don't.
Mm,
So yeah.
that's very well put. So then we get to the next part. So the master plan today is to deal with four major quotations. The first one about subtracting the number of duties or objects or things you own, so that you become richer, in imagination and spirit. And the second one of the four is this other passage that uh, struck me about how the poet gets the better part of a property. And this is the part where I have problems with it, being the son and the grandson and the great grandson of a long line of uh, subsistence farmers in Italy. And I was a little bit, I wouldn't say I was insulted by this, but I was like, maybe you're missing something, Henry. He says, I've frequently seen a poet withdraw, having enjoyed the most valuable part of a farm. That's the part that kind of struck me and maybe even irked me a bit. The idea here is that the poet gets the best part of the farm. In fact, he skims the milk off the farm. He gets the cream, and the farmer gets the rest because the farmer is, as you say, apropos of what you say, the farmer is burdened with the mortgage, with the fences, with the animals, with the barns, with ownership, with duties. Meanwhile, the poet can just own it in his imagination. He actually gets the coolest part, the nicest part. So, what do you think, Corey?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, um, I kind of agree with your reaction to this in the sense that it does seem like a lapse, uh, for Thoreau. It seems like a lack of theory of mind that, um, you know, just because you consider it a burden, you don't. He doesn't know. We also don't know, but he doesn't know to what extent. That farmer has a poetic attachment to it. You know, when when that farmer's out in the field toiling away, it might look like a burden to him, but when he goes to supper and enjoys looking over everything and all that he's accomplished, and perhaps a growing family, and all these things that people tend to enjoy, uh, you know, perhaps he has poetic feelings all the same, but it seems like Thoreau mistakes uh, the public experience of the farmer as the whole, and fails to consider the private experience of the farmer.
Yeah. Uh, and to be fair to Thoreau, fairer to Thoreau, I mean, he might just have a particular goal in mind here, like a political goal of just saying, hey, let's be a little more suspicious of, of taxes and financial burdens and the way mortgages are set up. So, um, but yeah, that's hard. It's hard to know, like just within a bird's eye view of this part. But you must have this experience. When you've worked really hard on something, there's a kind of an extra vision you get of that thing that people on the outside
Yeah.
don't get, right? So it could be something as simple as, I don't know, building a box, washing the
Yeah.
floor super well, and making it shine, So there's a certain it's not just that work is ennobling, but sometimes the poetry comes out only by working. Right? I know my grandfather, one of the, he passed away a long time ago, but I remember when I was in college, I was studying art history, and I thought, I know so much more than my grand. I was very arrogant. I was like studying art history, music history, and paintings and art. And here's my grandfather, the 100 miles from Rome. He had never talked about going to Rome or museums or anything. I said, "What is beautiful to you?" I said very arrogantly at 19 years old, and he said, "When I've worked on a field of wheat and it's all golden in the sun and ready to harvest." And that very simple sentence kind of means more and more to me every year.
Yeah. 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 And there is definitely something, the the intricacies of a task or the intricacies of that farmer's dominion um, will only reveal itself through the necessity of tending to it, Um, so there's definitely a lost appreciation that even a poet enjoying the property can't necessarily experience. But yeah, but Thoreau was just very skeptical. He uh, definitely struggled with the idea. And to be fair, at that time in New England, um, there's there's cause to believe that his neighbors weren't uh, as content as they could have been with their lives, and might have been spending too much time in the toil of it instead of in the reveling of it. So
Yeah,
I wouldn't dismiss his perception altogether, but
yeah.
yeah, I think he misses the point to some degree.
It kind of reminds me of two different Roberts, Robert Burns and Robert Frost. So two of my
Mm,
favorite poems when I was studying English literature were Robert Burns' famous poem to a mouse, where he describes, he's plowing in the field and he destroys the mouse's den. And it's this long poem about, the mouse is, just doing his job. And here I am, this agent of civilization messing up nature's balance. And that's the poem where the famous line comes up, or the best laid schemes of mice and men go
mm,
off the stray in English, but gang after gley in Scots. And then there's the other poem by Robert Frost, many poems by Robert Frost, like about, you know, the nature of New England and stuff. And the thing that was interesting, I started studying, unfortunately, I started studying them because before I studied them, they were like these gods to me. And then studying them, you find out all this stuff and you analyze them and not quite as romantic, but they were both failed farmers. So that always struck me, the fact that they were failed farmers. They both talk about it like, wow, these are poets who are really in nature. They're farming, they're building walls. Like at one point, Robert Frost is building a wall with his neighbor, this beautiful poem about walls. And I'm like, but then you learn about their lives, like, actually they weren't so good at farming as my grandfather was.
yeah,
Raised six people with, just his hands, no electricity, no mechanical help whatsoever during the worst years of World War II, and the famine after World War II that came to South Italy, um, some parts. So I don't know what you think about that, but that this poet versus farmer thing has always kind of occupied my mind.
yeah. That's quite the dichotomy there. Like, I did not know that about Robert Burns or Robert Frost, so that was fun to learn. It is kind of interesting too that it kind of makes sense from like a personality psychology perspective that someone who's a good poet would not make a great farmer. Uh, Poets tend to be very high in openness, and sometimes that just doesn't come with a lot of trait conscientiousness, which um, is definitely more appropriate for a farmer, that conscientiousness. And but when you're very open, uh, there it's easy to get distracted. Everything seems equally worth pursuing,
Right.
and that's what makes you a good poet. But it doesn't make you a good tender of things.
Right, right, right. No, it is interesting. So we did just to be a little timekeeper here, we did two two of the four that I want to do today. The first two we didn't talk about everything. There's the Hindu element of letting go of possessions. That's a possibility. But three and four,
Mm.
fortunately, on the same page. One is about um, well, we'll just read one and then the other. And the last one, of course, is one of the most famous lines in all of Thoreau. So I'll read it and then maybe you can comment because you did have a lot of interesting things to say. We must learn to reawaken and keep ourselves awake, not by mechanical aids. In this case, he was talking about alarm clocks, which he thought were terrible, but by infinite expectation of the dawn, which does not forsake us in our soundest sleep. I know of no more encouraging fact than the unquestionable ability of man to elevate his life by a conscious endeavor.
Yeah, yeah, no, I think this points to one of the core motivations of Thoreau's experiment at Walden Pond, and that was uh, he felt that the impending industrial age and the commodification of everything and the uh, blind adherence to so-called progress uh, had lulled us into a slumber of just kind of droning droning away and just being worker drones and forgetting ourselves, forgetting to live, putting our lives to tomorrow so that we could work today. And he, I think, from his perspective, tomorrow just never came. It was just another day of work, another day of work, another day of longing, and oh, just one more day, and I'll be able to live. Just one more day, and I'll be able to live. And he saw people getting entrapped in that cycle, falling asleep into it, to adhere to his wording there, and uh, kind of setting themselves up to remain at work, to remain in that cycle, and not remember what they were working for, uh, what was the end to that means. So
Right, exactly. And if you write a Thoreau at some point, if you write your own book on withdrawing and meditation and the values that you're espousing here. So I hear a theme in what you're saying, which is this paradoxical circle of supposedly if you work hard enough and make enough money to retire, then you can have a peaceful little enclave somewhere on this planet and uh, and have a garden and whatever. But turns out that the work may swallow you up. You may never get to that point, or you
mm,
may practice, a kind of, I'll do this in order to get that, but you never get that. You only do this, right? That's what I hear anyway
right.
in your your thoughts today.
Yeah, yeah, that encapsulates it pretty well. I would agree with that.
Yeah, and what do you think about this where it says conscious endeavor? When I read this, what I hear
Mm.
is this idea that it's a very optimistic thing, right? Because the idea is that we can consciously make our lives better. And I always wonder, having read some philosophy, is willpower really, is he talking about willpower here, first of all? And if he is there a problem with that? Is this does this inspire you, or does this make you more kind of pessimistic, right? We can improve our lives through conscious endeavor. In other words, through trying, intentionally trying.
Yeah. I mean, well, this is the plight of humanity right there is being the rational animal, being conscious beings uh, that that makes conscious effort, conscious endeavor a prerequisite to your own humanity. And uh, and he saw his his neighbors and his friends and his contemporaries uh, leaving their potential on the table, leaving their humanity on the table, uh, and I think I think just in these two sentences, um, I think he truly believes that mere waking up, merely becoming conscious, uh, is more than half the battle in of itself. Um, that if they were to wake up, if his neighbors were to wake up, they'd be 90% of the way to fulfilling themselves. That I think he truly thinks that the slumber is uh, the impediment.
Thank you so much for that, Corey. I read that a little differently than you.
Okay.
That point of view. Oh no, no, please. I mean, that point of view is really inspiring to me. Um, I read it more like self-help versus, you know, some other stuff. But you're reading it more deeply, I think. Because the whole part before he goes on and on about aurora, right? The is it a Greek word that means dawn, or is it a Latin word that means dawn? But anyway, he goes on and on about aurora and waking up and this whole metaphor of waking up. And he goes on and talks about how terrible it is to have an alarm clock. Why should you need an alarm clock? That's what he means by the mechanical aid. So you're following in that line of thought, the line of thought that there's a slumber. We're not awake to our potential. We leave a lot on the table, as you're saying, and
Mm,
awakening from the slumber is already more, quite of the way towards this fulfillment of yourself, right?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah.
So that leads to the last one, which is I went to the woods because I wish to live deliberately. And yeah, these lines are quoted all over the place. We talk about Family Guy, and uh,
Yeah.
so what do you make of this very well quoted? I don't think it'll fit on a coffee cup yet, but maybe the first few words.
Yeah, and the first few words are pretty powerful in of themselves. And I guess it is a popular enough quote. You could probably make it an anapodoton, but uh, yeah, th that word deliberately, it that's again, that's consciously. That's
Right.
um, with plan, with intention, with desire, and um, and with a goal in mind, um, and to front only the essential facts of life. That's the that's the experiment at Walden Pond is an essentialism, is reducing his life down to what is just essential and determining what else. Oh, if if there were anything that he did not find himself needing during the experiment, uh, to question its superfluity, and that it should be taken upon or adopted with some level of hesitation, I think. Um, and I think that that's a demonstration of really, really sound prudence.
Right. Yeah. Wow. I mean, I've heard some when I taught this text many years ago at the New School. I think the name of the course was the social history of nature or the philosophy, and I forget. But my students would often come to this line, and that was they quoted it without necessarily knowing that it was one of the most quoted parts. It is something about the power of this. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, right? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, there's a beauty to that. Um, yeah, for me, I'm struck more by the first few words. I went to the woods, right? So, why would somebody want to go into the woods, right? Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like you would think you go into the woods to escape life, and he is kind of avoiding certain things about life. I think in the biography, this he had some problems with not paying his taxes. I think it might have put him in jail or something. I don't remember. I try to kind of
Yeah. I
yeah.
think that's civil disobedience. But yeah, quite the character in that regard as well. That could have its own devotion entirely. That writing.
Yeah, that's amazing, that text. And I think he wrote that later, probably, I would guess. And that's inspired.
Yeah, yeah, I believe so. Um, yeah, I've only ever seen them published together, but so they must have been close temporally.
Yeah, I think this it inspired Gandhi and inspired Martin Luther King. And I think Martin Luther King was inspired both by Thoreau and Gandhi, right? The civil disobedience, nonviolent protest, etc. So there's a lot more to do, but wow, I think we covered a lot in a little bit
Yeah,
of time together. So yeah, thank you so much for being willing to you know go slow, go slow, and really share ideas on this text that I think we both have
yeah,
really loved over the years. All
yeah.
right,
Well,
so
thank you for having me. It was
yeah,
really, really a lot of fun,
yeah,
always.
of course. I'll see you guys next time.